I finally watched the second Devil Wears Prada movie, and it was a lot better than I expected. So, of course, as many of you know, The Devil Wears Prada 2 came out recently. The first film is very iconic in fashion and just in general. It's one of those chick flicks that is put on the same level with things like Sex and the City and, all these different reasons why a lot of people these days are into fashion. Those were kind of their first entryways into understanding the way that the fashion industry works. The first film, very interesting story. It follows a character, Andy, who essentially is in New York trying to make a journalism career happen. More of a hard-nosed, serious journalist, but she eventually lands this internship as, Anna Wintour, let's just say in quotation marks, assistant, because that's basically who the book references, Anna Wintour. So basically, she got a job as an assistant at a magazine called Runway. Runway is essentially supposed to be this sort of pseudo version of Vogue in a way. So that's really cool film. It really talks about how Andy found a lot of parts of fashion really frivolous, which does mirror in reality what people think of the fashion industry. I think the average person, if you tell them you work in fashion, they think that's really pretentious. Like, what do you even do? That's not a real job. Even though, fashion brands make crazy amounts of money. LVMH makes billions. Louis Vuitton makes billions. Shein made almost 40 billion. It's crazy that people don't think that there are loads of jobs that are needed to generate these massive billions of dollars. Crazy, but it's how it goes. And essentially over time, you see in the first film, Andy slowly but surely become part of the fashion industry and warm to the fashion industry and become one of the characters that she used to make fun of. And I think the craziest thing about the first film, you really get to see how mean Miranda Priestly was to Andy, and essentially Andy just accepting everything and just taking it and just feeling like this is just how the fashion industry works, taking all this unnecessary abuse and bad treatment essentially. It gets to a point where it is really kind of annoying how much she gets pushed around and treated like shit, and I guess that is really perfect because it mirrors the way the fashion industry functions so perfectly. As someone that works in the fashion industry and has for over 10 years, I can definitely say for sure that is how it functions. And so 20 years later, when I saw that they had announced the second Devil Wears Prada film, I thought it was really strange because we know what's going on with Hollywood. We know Hollywood is having its issues right now. It has a downturn. There are people that don't have a lot of creative ideas, and so they just keep rehashing all these old films, whether it's Star Wars or Fast and the Furious. They beat that into the ground, or just trying to latch onto anything that was good from the past and bring it back to make money. So I expected it to be sort of a luxury brand marketing cash grab, which at certain points it was, but it definitely wasn't as bad as I thought. So the second film, spoilers ahead if you haven't watched it. So if you haven't seen the film, sorry, but there will be spoilers. But the second film, it almost isn't really a film about fashion. It feels like it's more of a film about journalism and media as a whole, and how journalism and media functions now is completely different to how it was in the past. In the first film, print was really big. Vogue was a huge print magazine. Now, fast forward all these years later, Vogue is majority a digital platform. They have things like Vogue Runway, they have things like Vogue Business, they have an app that everyone downloads in fashion and reads the articles through the app. So it really talks to how media has changed. At the start of the film, you see these journalists that were winning awards get laid off, and that is literally what is happening in journalism right now. So many people are losing their jobs. Everything is going digital. Journalists are asking and trying to figure out how they can create their own personal platforms online and move to social media. People are moving to platforms like Substack. That is what journalists are using these days. So it was great to see how they took the story of the first film and made it more contemporary and more relevant to how things are going on today. There are many other aspects in the film that spoke to this. There were elements where there was one scene where Miranda Priestly was hanging her own coat, and they used that as a chance to talk about how nowadays HR is more of a serious thing and people take complaints more seriously in the workplace. And they talk about how, the abuse that used to happen in fashion that was just okay. It isn't really okay anymore. With social media, people have a platform to speak up against these things. There were even elements in the film where you saw people making fun of Miranda Priestly and almost basically calling her a dragon and an old hag that is past her best days. That is something similar to what people would say about Anna Wintour these days, especially with the Bezos family and how she's been courting the Bezos family recently with things like the Met Gala and a potential takeover of Vogue via Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez. So these are all conversations we're having in the modern day, and it's interesting to see the parallels that were drawn between that in the film. Another thing that I thought was very contemporary, and I liked the way they did it, was when all the suits came in and were making all these decisions on the way that Runway as a magazine and as a publication in this case should operate. Meanwhile, these are people that don't know anything about fashion, or they're not fashionable in any way. They're just finance people. And that really mirrors the way that a lot of things are these days. I think a lot of reasons why sometimes it feels like creativity is on a downward spiral, or films aren't as interesting as they were, or fashion publications don't write stories as interesting as they used to, is because everything now is about metrics. How many clicks did the story get? How many views did this thing get? How much money did this thing generate? And when that is just the only consideration for things, it takes away so much from creativity. And it's why films feel a bit vapid these days. And I really like that scene because it really is indicative of how the world is right now and what we're experiencing now with this sort of terrible creativity and creative output that we tend to see. It was even really funny because as someone that works in the fashion industry, it's quite obvious that a lot of these magazines don't have the budgets that they used to have. If you go back to the times of all these really famous Vogue editors like Diana Vreeland, for example, and you look at the crazy shoots she used to do, they used to fly all over the world to take pictures. Vogue doesn't really have those kind of budgets anymore. They used to stay in luxurious hotels. They used to have personal drivers. When the suits came in, they started saying, okay, no more personal drivers. Everyone has to take Ubers and all those kind of things. And you saw Miranda Priestly's crazy facial expression like, oh my God, is this my life now? That is really how the fashion industry has transitioned over time. And yeah, all those magazine budgets have completely gone down the drain because the magazines don't really generate the money that they once used to generate. Earlier, I did say I thought it would be kind of a marketing exercise for lots of luxury brands because everyone was trying to get their clothing in the film. There were some brands that were prominently featured. Dior, they were talking about Dior constantly for damn near a quarter of the film. Obviously, Emily Blunt's character was working at Dior. She was sort of a manager at Dior. So that was a way that they could throw Dior down our throats throughout the film. That was interesting. I also like the parallels between Jeff Bezos and reality. There was a billionaire in the film who was dating Emily, and it kind of mirrors Lauren Sanchez Bezos because this guy tried to buy the Runway magazine for his girlfriend the same way that Jeff Bezos is supposedly, reportedly, allegedly trying to purchase Vogue for Lauren Sanchez Bezos. And it's quite funny because in the film, Miranda Priestly said to Emily that I don't think you could take over Runway magazine because you're not really a visionary. You know, you're just someone that can help not steer the ship, but you can kind of help as someone that's a staff member on the ship, but you don't have the vision to steer the ship, is essentially what she was saying. And it's quite funny because everyone feels the same way about Lauren Sanchez. Like, she's not creative in any way. She's not fashionable in any way. No one in fashion really takes her seriously. So she doesn't have the vision to run a Vogue. It's crazy how they were drawing those direct parallels between Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez and that in the film. Even in the film, for example, the woman who ended up saving Runway magazine from being taken over by Emily's boyfriend, essentially. It kind of felt like she was supposed to play the role of Jeff Bezos' ex-wife because they were talking about her character was a woman that won loads of money in a divorce settlement. They said that she's super kind. They talked about how she gave a lot to charity. And I'm like, that's literally Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. And then she ended up saving a magazine because she cares about the arts. That literally sounded like Jeff Bezos' ex-wife. Because as far as I'm concerned, Mackenzie Scott, who is this person I'm referring to, she's given tens of billions to charity and she pledged to give away all her wealth to really good causes. So there were a lot of parallels drawn there. I found that very fascinating. It was also kind of ironic because Andy in the first film, her character almost felt like she was above working in fashion. She found it so frivolous. And it's so funny that her real journalism job, when that failed, she had to run back to fashion for, a stable income as a job. It's very funny because once again, like I said earlier in this video, it really mirrors how so many people don't take fashion seriously in general. But in reality, fashion is an industry that generates money, and it will always generate money so long as people wear clothes. So it's always going to be a valuable industry. And while the film was a very interesting exercise on where the fashion industry and media is in general right now, I did find the writing a bit lazy. I'm not going to lie, because I think anyone could write a script, especially if you know what's going on in fashion, which is a lot of people. You could just write a script depicting what is going on in fashion and end of story, which is basically what this film is, if we're going to be honest. Granted, The Devil Wears Prada is not like one of those intellectual films where you're going to get these like intellectual stories. It's a chick flick. It's not supposed to be that, right? But I did want to see, and I was hoping to see, maybe they would showcase some solutions or have some sort of writing that isn't just here's what's going on today in a movie form. Kind of the writers expanding into creating a whole new narrative that maybe you haven't seen. Maybe talk about maybe how you think the fashion industry is going to look 10 years from now, even further into the future. Or maybe they found a solution to this and it changed, or maybe AI failed and it self-destructed, or AI tried to attack humans, so humans had to destroy it and reset, and everything went back to print because people were so, scared of using technology. Something just interesting at the end to just really give us something unique, or a unique take, or a unique perspective. But instead, I didn't really get any different point of view. It just felt like watching the film, I was quite visibly watching what I already know to be true in the industry the whole time. And with mirrors of things that have already happened, like I was saying, drawing parallels between fashion deals that Jeff Bezos that is trying to do and mirroring that in the film, or showcasing that Vogue budgets have gone down and mirroring that in the film. There was even a story that was published by Runway in the film that was talking about Speedfash. Speedfash is essentially a fast fashion brand that they wrote a puff piece on that turned out to be super problematic. It's basically the film version of Shein. And that's what I mean. It's just really drawing parallels to things going on in reality to things going on in that created universe of The Devil Wears Prada. But what I do like that Speedfash part of the film illustrated was that the lines between advertiser and magazine and journalism, they've always been blurred in fashion. That's always been a known thing. And I think in the digital age where people can be a bit more critical about things, I think it's become a lot more prominent and apparent to readers and the general public, where maybe before it was only obvious to people that worked in the industry. A lot of magazines, you always have to take what they say with a grain of salt because their advertisers are paying their bills. It's the advertisers are keeping the lights on at a lot of these publications, so they cannot afford to lose these advertisers. So even when a brand has a bad show or they do something bad, these magazines are always going to come to their defense. They're going to do PR control. They're going to pretend like it's good because these are the people paying their bills. And it's quite funny because that Speedfash puff piece, it just reminded me of if Shein paid Vogue tons of money, tens of millions, to run a story in Vogue. They would have to take the money because that is what is keeping the lights on, and therefore they would have to run a piece on Shein and essentially lie about Shein being good, even though we know that Shein, from a labor standpoint and labor violations and toxic fabrics and toxic garments, we know Shein is terrible, like completely horrible. Something I did find odd about the film was how Andy was depicted in the second film, because they built this whole story up about how Andy went to a real newspaper. She was doing really good journalism. She was winning all these awards. So at that point, she should have built a certain level of self-confidence and self-worth. So I did find it extremely odd when she went back to work at Runway and all of a sudden she's this timid person that's scared of Miranda Priestly, and Miranda Priestly put her in this terrible office and she just accepted it. Like all that stuff, I just found it really weird. I'm like, surely at this point, she's a bit more confident in her own skin and she would fight back against Miranda Priestly, especially when they were telling us that whole HR situation. I just expected her character to put her foot down a lot more and not take a lot of Miranda Priestly's shit, for lack of a better word. I also did find it weird how perfectly seamlessly Andy went back into runway and just became a fashion girly again. It was kind of awkward because, once again, she thought that fashion was a bit frivolous, even though she worked in fashion in the first film and she ended up adopting a lot of the codes of a fashion person. She left runway and she became this hard-nosed journalist. Even at the start of the second film, she had started to dress like a hard-nosed journalist again, and so she had to kind of make her way back into dressing like a fashion person. So it was really weird how seamlessly she became a fashion person again after becoming a hard-nosed journalist and sort of rejecting everything that she learnt at Runway just to accept it all back. And it was especially weird that Andy was scared of Miranda Priestly as a character and taking shit from her when this was a version of Miranda Priestly that had been beaten into the ground. This is a woman that had probably received hundreds of PR complaints, all the way to the point where she was hanging her own coat. The suits were telling her things and she just accepted it, whereas the old Miranda Priestly would not just take, command from the suit. She would fight back and argue back, even if her job was at stake. She was, that convicted in her opinions and her way of life and her position in the fashion world that she felt like she had the power to do that. Whereas now she felt like she didn't have the power to do that. It was almost like a sanded down, more accountable, more scrutinized, more corporate, more HR managed version of Miranda Priestly that we got in the second film. It's like the Devil Wears Prada, but this devil is now on a leash, even if she's still wearing Prada. It's insane. Before I continue, I want to know in the comments, I'm going to ask you all a question about the film. Do you guys think that Miranda Priestly's character was a shell of herself and they didn't do her character justice? I think there were a lot of people online that I saw when it came to the discourse that said they didn't really depict Miranda Priestly properly because, yes, the fashion industry has changed, but them depicting her as this powerless woman isn't really accurate when you think of Anna Wintour. Anna Wintour is not powerless. Anna Wintour still has all the power in the world. She's still the most important woman in the whole fashion industry from a media standpoint. Of course, from a business standpoint, you could mention people like Delphine Arnault, but in terms of a media standpoint, she still is the most single important woman in fashion. So them depicting her as this timid, corporate controlled woman, it just isn't really accurate, and a lot of people didn't like that. But what did you guys think about the way that her character was depicted? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the clothing, because I found it fascinating as someone that has worked as a fashion journalist in the industry. I've actually been a journalist for Vogue, funny enough. I was a writer for Vogue Runway at a point. So I would cover some shows at Paris Fashion Week. So I was literally the exact thing that they're depicting to a certain extent in these films, right? And fashion editors don't really dress the way they were depicted in this film. You saw people wearing all these crazy sequin Bermuda shorts in the film, crazy colors, sequin jumpsuits, all that kind of stuff. And I was looking at the costume design like, this is really odd. There is literally in fashion, there's a trope. It's almost a meme that fashion editors look a certain way. They always look very prim and proper and kind of intellectual because they almost depict themselves. Editors and fashion journalists like to depict themselves as very serious and intellectual. And we think about fashion in a very intellectual way. It is kind of a meme, but that is genuinely how it goes. And I guess on one hand, you could say that if the characters were depicted in that way, it wouldn't really be visually interesting. But then for a film that is trying to so accurately depict the way that fashion media operates right now, it was kind of strange that when it came to the costumes, it was completely different. So I thought that was strange, I guess. And then you have to think maybe that is alienating to the mass audience because The Devil Wears Prada is not really a film for fashion people. Yes, fashion people watch it because it's a film about us working in the industry. It's supposed to be mainstream. It's supposed to be the kind of thing that girls that don't really know much about fashion watch it and think they know a lot about fashion, right? It's that kind of film. And it's always super popular. I mean, the box office for The Devil Wears Prada 2 has been insane. And while I don't think that the second film is anywhere near the first film is just way more original, way more interesting. For the time, it really depicted a certain thing that I think needed to be known at the time. I think it also exposed the way that the fashion industry operates in a way that, at least to the mainstream, it hadn't been exposed. I think with the second film, where media is going and the death of print, that's not really a thing that's been exposed or revealed to anyone. People kind of know that that's the way that journalism has been going, especially anyone that works in media or media adjacent roles. And then also going back to Andy's character, once again, her just being a pushover. It was so weird how Emily was involved in, buying Runway magazine without Andy knowing, because they created this whole big plan to save the magazine, not knowing that Emily actually just wanted the magazine for herself, and she was planning behind the scenes for her boyfriend, her billionaire boyfriend, to buy it so that she could run it herself, right? When Andy finally told Miranda Priestly that was their plan, and Miranda Priestly was like, oh, she's not doing it for me, she's doing it for herself. And Andy essentially saw how Emily was selfish and would do anything for her own personal gain. She doesn't care if she's snaking her friend to do it. Well, Andy thought that was her friend. To then, by the end of the film, see her be super close friends with, Emily, it just didn't make any sense. It just did not make sense. That is just not reality. Like, you're not going to be super close friends and buddy with someone that snaked you in that way. I just don't. That was also really strange. And then the weirdest part of the whole film was this love interest that Andy had, this sort of Australian realtor who was selling properties, and one of the properties that she wanted to rent, he just happened to be the person that was dealing with that. And then there was no real interesting character development from this person. It was just, they met a few times and then this person disappeared from the film. I don't even know why he was included in the first place, to be honest. Her boyfriend in the first film, it made sense because her boyfriend in the first film was used as this touch point to depict how she had changed over time, because he would mention, you used to say that you didn't care about all this fashion stuff. Now you're becoming one of them. Now you're this. Now you don't have time for me. You're chilling with all these people. Now you want to go to Paris. You don't want to spend time with me. You're too bougie for us. You're putting your values in the wrong things, like frivolous clothing items, instead of spending time with your friends and people you love. So it was a really... Her boyfriend in the first film was actually a really important character in the character development of Andy, because it helps the audience showcase how she's changing. Whereas this boyfriend in the second film doesn't really... There's no through line. There's no use for him to be there, to be honest. So I found that really strange. So all in all, the second Devil Wears Prada movie was definitely better than I thought. Obviously, the writing could be a lot better and more interesting. It was just really an accurate depiction of the way things are. But it was definitely a lot smarter than what I thought it was going to be. I just thought it was going to be a really terrible cash grab. It's not terrible. It's definitely not terrible. And so while the first Devil Wears Prada movie almost makes you want to work in the industry and gives you intrigue about how the fashion industry operates, the second film is essentially telling you why you may never ever have the chance to. And on that note, thank you very much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And of course, leave a hype. That will really help the video out. And leave your thoughts below if you've watched the film on your overall thoughts about the film and anything I've said. And yeah, see you guys in the next video.